This is a fascinating story. The Federal Aviation Administration has rejected a proposal to cut training hours in half for those applying to become co-pilots. Indianapolis-based Republic Airlines submitted the request. It asks that the FAA slash the minimum amount of flying experience required to hire co-pilots from the mandatory 1,500 to 750 hours. The airline's push to decrease the training requirement comes amid the mounting pressure airlines are facing due to staffing shortages, leading to tens of thousands of flight cancellations and delays.
In a statement striking down the proposal, the FAA wrote, after full consideration of Republic's petition for exemption and the public comments, the FAA has determined that the relief requested is not in the public interest and would adversely affect safety. In the past, co-pilots were eligible to be hired with as little as 250 hours of training. That changed in 2009 after an airplane crashed for Continental Airlines in Buffalo, New York, killing all of the passengers. All right, we might finally have an argument on our hands this week. This is ridiculous.
What's your issue, Robby?
Not only should it be cut, it should be cut back to 250 hours. This is protectionism and bureaucracy. The FAA has no idea what the optimal number of hours anyway to train pilots are. I don't trust them. The government doesn't know these. The government still requires us to take off our shoes and belts to get on planes. They have no idea what contributes to airlines being more safe. This is the reason the airline industry, a big part of the reason the airline industry is broken right now. It's too hard to get pilots back into the system. Many of them retired or were laid off during the pandemic. Many of those were hired under conditions where they didn't have to work this many hours. So you got them out of the system. We can't get new pilots back into the system because that's a ridiculous amount of hours, arbitrarily doubled just because there was one plane crash. Not an increase in plane crashes generally, but just one plane crash. We don't even know if that plane crash happened because there weren't enough pilots taking enough training hours. It was just sad, outraged people. It is sad. It's sad. But plane travel is still very safe, very few plane crashes. Sometimes they do crash, almost never, but sometimes they do. And we all have to suffer higher prices because of it, because the government said, well, all right, we'll just double the hours for some reason.
So I would argue that the Federal Aviation Administration actually does know a great deal about pilot training and what kind of training hours are required.
No, they don't.
And that I agree that there's a really root problem here that's being sidestepped, and you alluded to it. It's the fact that there were mass layoffs of pilots during COVID, despite the fact that U.S. Airlines took $54 billion in COVID-19 money.
Which was outrageous.
Wait a minute. Which was contingent in part on them not firing people. So what did they do? They did what a lot of companies did, which is to basically push people out by offering them these retirement packages. So they didn't have to actually pay their salary and could pocket a lot of that money and distribute it in the forms of dividends to shareholders. So they weren't cash poor. They can't afford to train pilots optimally to keep the public safe. If you were on that one plane that went down, I'm sure you wouldn't be quite so flippant about the training required for pilots. And moreover, the training is not the issue here. The cost isn't the issue here. It's whether or not corporate greed has made airlines prioritize their shareholders and their own profits over actually keeping the public safe. And I would argue what's happening right now is there's a real shortage because life as a pilot is horrible. They are experiencing some of the scheduling issues that
you have to train for 1,500 hours before you can even drive a freaking plane.
No, it's not. It's horrible because they have terrible hours. They're scheduling just like a lot of similarities to what the rail workers that are on the brink of strike right now have been arguing about. Very low pay, very long hours, very few breaks, very unstable schedule, obviously very exhausting and taxing job that requires a significant degree of training. And they haven't been recruiting new people to fill in those kinds of spots because they haven't been willing to pay to train them. And now, instead of taking responsibility for the actions that they made as a corporation, they're trying to offload the cost, the moral cost, onto the American public and our safety.
It takes time to train them. It takes 5 times as much time to train them as it used to.
The concern isn't training. The obstacle here isn't training. The reason that we have
the obstacle is the training.
No. The reason that we have a pilot pipeline is because these airlines don't want to pay for the training, not because there aren't people willing to do the training and the time to actually implement the training. Also, it's because they paid people to stay home and quit their jobs because they wanted to, again, pocket this COVID relief.
I don't disagree with you on that.
Instead of investing in their business.
Absolutely dead set against that when they did that. I said they would just pocket that money, the airlines, which is exactly what they did. Totally against industry-specific bailouts. Down the line, I was against that.
So why not punish the airlines then, Robby? Why say that they should be able to get off the hook by simply offloading more costs onto the public. Where does this end? At what point are airlines going to be forced to be accountable for their reckless spending and the fact that they keep stuffing money into their shareholders' pockets instead of reinvesting in a business like a good business person would do?
When are we going to make the government accountable to actual science or safety or logic or reason or anything of that nature?
Well, I would love it if instead of constantly bailing out the airline industry, the government just bought the whole thing. It's a cheaper, at a certain point, we've paid more to bail the airline industry out than it's actually valued on paper.
The government has not demonstrated, the government is absolutely the problem here.
But the government isn't the one that's doing any of this. It's the airline company that's been told now you have to deal within the context. No rule has changed. They're basically seeking a rule. Wait a minute, no. The airlines are seeking a rule change in order to absolve themselves of the responsibility for their reckless spending practices during COVID. So why should the airlines get to stuff government money into the corporate coffers and then go ahead and beg to the government, give me more handouts in a way
This is not a handout.
Yes, it is.
This is saying we would like to go back to only 3 times as many hours as it used to be rather than 5 times as many hours.
They're asking to change rules that were not a problem before.
Stupid.
They were asking to change
These rules were always a problem.
Safety protocols that were not a problem before and which no one was objecting to before precisely because they wasted government money. So what is to incentivize them against continuing to waste government money and then running back after the fact to simply beg for the rules to be changed so they play by a different set of rules than every other business owner in America?
What do you mean different set of rules? All the airlines should equally have the rules that were in place beforehand. These rules, there's no evidence they contribute to greater plane safety.
First of all, you don't know that, Robby. You do not know that.
Have airplane crashes increased or decreased or anything of that nature?
You don't know that.
I know that they have not.
You absolutely don't know that. And frankly, I think it's the steady encroachment on our civil liberties. You mentioned the TSA, on our ability to travel freely, on our ability to travel without having to pay exorbitant fees for baggage check fees, and all of these other things that we all know that have been oppressive at the airport. I don't know why anybody would defend an airline's ability to expand their power and expand their lack of accountability to the public. At the end of the day, these airlines were able to function profitably and safely under the rules. So why is the knee-jerk reaction here to basically apologize for the institution for its own reckless spending habits and instead look to a rule change? Oh my God, that's so not what is going on. Look for a rule change instead of doing what they should do, which is to look at their accounting book and ask why it is that they have participated in this reckless spending, especially since it was done with this bailout
What if
money.
the government tomorrow increased it to 5,000 hours? You need 5,000 hours of training. And you would say, they said, no, we think it's in the best interest of safety.
No, we should have a conversation.
We could reduce plane crashes from 1 in a million to 1 in 2 million.
We could have a conversation at that time about what the conversation is. But neither
That's what they did. That's what they already did.
No, neither of us has in front of us, and neither of us was paying attention at whatever date and time in history, whether it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, who knows, when the initial rule change was made around this crash in Buffalo, New York. Yeah. So I'm very happy to go back and look at that decision and have a conversation when we both are informed by facts about what's going on here. But what we know for sure here is that the proximate cause of what the airlines are going through is that they wasted the money they were given in the context of COVID.
And they should never have been given that money.
The pilots, they treated their employees terribly. They basically pushed them out the door, and now they're crying and whining because they don't want to offer people salaries to come back and the training that they need to come back to do their job safely.
By the way, the training barrier is a protection for the employees and the pilots they have currently because they can't hire more people. And ultimately, that's what's driving up.
Yeah, they can't hire more people because
we're all customers.
You can read about this. Literally, the argument is that it's costly to train people, and they don't want to front the cost of that.
They pass it on to you. They always do. They pass it on to you. We're all going to pay higher prices because the FAA arbitrarily decided that 5 times more.
And now they're passing on safety onto us when they could have simply not dispersed government money
to their shareholders. Do you understand why I would say, though, that I do not trust the government to know what the appropriate balance of safety and convenience is? Can you, especially in an airport context?
We're not going to agree about that, Robby. I think that there needs to be an FDA to regulate food and drugs in this country.
Let's talk in the airline.
That was going to be my next sentence. And I think, by analogy, there needs to be regulation of aeronautics in this country. And I think the government that has the Air Force, that flies all of the Air Force, all the planes in the Navy, is very knowledgeable and effective, and perhaps the most expert person in the entire country, perhaps the world, about the issue of aeronautics. So yes, I think that there has to be an established oversight mechanism, and I don't know who. I certainly trust the government more than some private entity, since we see now all the cost cutting that the private entities are like.
When I have the experience of going through the airport, I am not struck with. I do not experience the feeling. I have so much confidence that the government understands
Robby,
how to be safe.
The airport isn't the FAA. These are different entities.
They're different agencies, but they're all part of the same federal government system.
Okay, well, you've already established that you don't want there to be an FDA. So if that's the standard of laissez-faire.
I really don't want there to be a TSA. Okay, they're telling us we got to go. There was the argument for the week. More rising after this.